Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome everybody here. My name is Tom Deppner. I'm in computer science. It's a rather unusual talk for us. It's not every day that we have somebody from theater arts and performance studies giving a talk for a computer science seminar.
Yes.
Sydney contacted me last May and said that we had a common student who pointed out that CS was getting into a responsible computer science initiative, and he had a lot of interest in this area. He came by and he spoke to Fentimol and me, or as the department chair, and we decided what he was doing was really fascinating, and it'd be great to have him here to give a talk. So here he is, Sydney.
Great. Hey, great. Thank you. Hi. Hi. Yeah, how's it going? How's it going, nerds? I say nerds because you're here for me, so that's probably a leading indicator of some kind of nerdery. Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and indeed to my sponsor, Computer Science, for having me here today. This is going to be a thing that happens. I want to start by kind of owning something. Today we're going to be talking a lot about bodies and embodiment. and I'm generally a fan of bringing one's body to work. Accordingly, I should note from the onset that I have been I've had a cold this week, and my throat is a mess, and I'm currently riding a wave of Dayquil and espresso. So there's a non-zero, give it up for Dayquil! For you who don't take adventurous drugs. In any event, there is a non-zero chance that I will have either a series of small strokes or a coughing attack or something right here in front of you, and for that I apologize in advance. So I want to start by, I guess, saying hi, and let's talk about stuff, shall we? I want to put. This is what we're going to do today. I want to put this talk in a kind of particular historical context, which is to say Stop and Shop on the East Side last weekend. Have you ever give it up for Stop and Shop? Yeah, snaps for Stop and Shop. So as you may know, Stop and Shop, as of a couple of months ago, I think, while they were in the process of variously unionizing or union busting, they hired a bunch of robots to help them with their, I guess, spill detection was the kind of the mantra. They were like, we need robots to help us know what a spill is. And so they hired a bunch of, they bought the HR processes for robots are still kind of in media res. They bought a bunch of robots called Martys. This is the name, they're called Martys. They're by a technology company called Badger Technologies. I don't know who comes up with these names. Anyway, I ran into one. I've never actually seen a Marty before, but I met one right by the Boar's Head cheese scenario over there. This is Marty, has kind of an anthropomorphic kind of face thing happening. Also packed with sensors and cameras. It is a device, give it up for sensors. It is a rolling semi-autonomous machine that just kind of ambles. Can a robot amble? Sure, let's double down on amble. It kind of marauds through Stop and Shop looking for spills. And when it identifies a spill, or when the robot thinks it identifies a spill, it takes a picture. And that picture is beamed across the internet to the Philippines, where some underpaid person is paid to identify whether or not a spill is or is not present. This is a true story. If a spill is officially, there per the Philippines, a bunch of employees in the Stop and Shop get a ding on their iPhone apps, and the spill can be cleaned up. So that's technology for you. And you yay. And of course, there are parallel structures here between Stop and Shop Martys and, for example, Facebook moderation and other seemingly auto-magical apparatuses or technologies, which are actually quite heavily dependent on human labor. Nonetheless, I found myself in Stop and Shop last weekend apparently making a face at Marty. I was told I was making a face at Marty because my partner was like, Sydney, you're making a face. And I didn't believe her at the moment, but in fairness, to test this hypothesis of whether or not I was making a face, I actually took a photo of my face on the opposite side of me taking a photo of Marty, and this was, and so just to, so that's, I really want you to look into the steely depths of my eyes here to just see how much fear there really was in that moment, because I'd never seen a Marty before, and you always remember your first. This Marty scenario only got worse somehow, because the Marty, as some of you may know who are in robotics or design, the Marty goes down a kind of decision tree when it figures out like what it's trying to do in space and time, right? So Marty has a map of the space, the grocery store, and it goes up and down the aisles, and if it encounters an obstacle, it tries to go around the obstacle. It'll like back up and rotate and try and go around, and back up and rotate and go around. And so I was observing Marty because of my job, I guess, and as I was checking out, Marty made the unfortunate decision, I guess, to go up the apple juice aisle where a woman who really had, I'm going to use a swear word, who really had zero fucks left. She really did not care for being interrupted by a 7-foot-tall surveillant apparatus. I understand this conceptually. And she, in contrast to everybody else in the Stop and Shop, did not get out of Marty's way. So Marty goes through the decision tree, right? So Marty's like, okay, well I'm gonna, okay, maybe I can no, you're still, okay, we're gonna, yep, no, yep, no, yep, okay. And meanwhile, my 2-year-old, who is also out of Fox, decides that she's like very interested, understandably, in this googly-eyed monstrosity, right? This is like it's a nightmare on wheels, and she's into it, right? Because she's 2. She is also kind of a nightmare on wheels, but the wheels are legs. Anyway, so she decides to start doing like kind of a robot dance, like around the robot, and meanwhile the woman with the apple juice is like still not moving, and the 2-year-old is like doing a thing, and Marty just, God bless Marty, just he's really confused, not sure what to do. Like, there's not a decision tree for like 2-year-old plus old lady with 0 fucks. And so the woman runs out of patience, understandably so, and starts ramming Marty with the grocery cart. And the 2-year-old, who is not one to miss out on a random act of violence, starts kicking Marty. And Marty is just like, and eventually, because I don't want to pay for a $35,000 robot from Badger Technologies, you've been there, I take the 2-year-old out, and eventually Marty is able to escape from just probably like the worst case robotic scenario imaginable in a grocery store outside of literal Terminators. But this, for me, is kind of a crux, right? This is a moment where emerging technologies of robotics and surveillance and the weird ways they move through space and time runs into people being observed and not caring for it very much. This is kind of the braid of my talk today. We're going to be talking about bodies. We're going to be talking about movement. We're going to be talking about emerging technologies, and we're going to be talking about surveillance. That was the preamble. That was like a 10-minute preamble to my talk. It gets worse from here. So I want to introduce you to a notion, the body never lies. Yeah, so this is a lot of my upbringing in dance performance is by way of choreographers like Martha Graham. Martha Graham, who was very sort of emphatic in saying things like, the body never lies, movement never lies. And what she's doing there is sort of making an argument theatrically that what is being represented in Graham's choreography on stage is a statement of truth, a personal sort of essential utterance that is tied to the psyche and other, I don't know, I haven't read too deeply in my Jung recently, but like Jung is in there somewhere. And there's a lot of like deep innate truths there, right? And so this is actually a really old notion that the body never lies, that movement never lies, that for me, I'm going to pick up on roughly the beginning of the Western dance tradition, give or take, to talk a little bit more about that. Though, I mean, you can also see Graham kind of echoing Michel de Montaigne, who says things in the late 16th century, like the body reveals us. This is an old notion that bodies somehow communicate their truths, their essential and eternal essences, right? So I want to take you back to Ballet Comique de Lorraine, which is arguably, forgive my French pronunciation, my French is garbage or garbage. So this is arguably the sort of inception point of the Western balletic tradition, right? And I just want to observe a couple things about how spectatorship was working in this particular circumstance, right? So in contrast to a proscenial environment where you have an audience audience kind of looking out and up at the stage action, here we have a multifaceted kind of matricide version of spectatorship, of viewing, right? Where we have a lot of people looking down at the staged action. I want to introduce you to a notion of figured dancing. Now, figured dancing is in dancing in figures, like figures. So around this time, you can't see it so much here, costuming what these, in this context, French courtiers were wearing, these panniers on top of panniers. I'm pretty sure that's French pronunciation. Panniers, whatever. It doesn't really, yeah, okay, we got some nod, thank you. So there's like a lot of like costuming, there's a lot of jewelry, and then there's the like lead paint that they were using as makeup. A lot of these folks aren't moving very fast. And a lot of the vocabulary that we now identify as balletic doesn't yet fully exist. And so we have a lot of like moving in various shapes to create signifying sort of moments, right? So we have individuals who are costumed in particular ways to signify certain things, for example, nations, and they make certain shapes according to certain geometries and certain kinds of numerological significances so as to create meaning, right? The bodies are a kind of instrument of this carriage of meaning. Fun fact, Nostradamus consulted on the ballet for the Medici family. So if you learn nothing else, it's that Nostradamus consulted on ballet. So please clap for that knowledge. Yeah, great. Yes, I just performed knowledge for you. You're welcome. Anyway, so you have this kind of figure dancing where you can imagine a kind of God's eye view of the stage where people are walking and then they hit a pose and then the pose is recognized by the audience and they go, yes, a shape. And then they walk over here and then there's another shape and they go, yes, shapes continue happening. And the shapes then allow the communication of meaning, right? So what I want to suggest though is that the God's eye view thing is a metaphor that we're going to see again and again through dance history and into our contemporary surveillant times. Now, a couple years ago, I was. And one more thing about the collapse of bodies and their the communication of their truths, right? So around this, a little later than this, there's the formulation and codification of the 5 core positions of the feet in ballet. Anybody know the 5 positions of the feet in ballet? Could you come on down and demonstrate the hi? Thank you for coming. Or you can use your hands, maybe hi. What are the 5 positions of the feet? Uh-huh.
Second.
Yeah.
Third.
Yep.
Fourth.
Yep.
Fifth.
Totally. Give a round of applause for our volunteer. Thank you. Excellently done with the feet on the hands. So these are the 5 core positions of the feet, right? And around this time, these positions, and specifically the kind of turned out quality of the feet, becomes sort of synonymous with nobility of character, right? So you have a bunch of kind of like princely, positive, good characters that have turned out positions, and in a kind of a very hyper-rational, enlightenment-y sense, this makes sense. There's 5 positions, and they all signify roughly the same thing. But then, because in the Enlightenment, because symmetry, for these 5 positive positions, we also have 5 anti-positions. So these are turned-in versions of the 5 positions here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And in these positions, on these as the sort of antithesis of the positivity and the nobility, signify nefariousness, right? So we have like lots of pirates who have these turned-in figures. And again, the notion is that the body is signifying its internal, eternal essence, right? Outward turnout is noble and good, turned in is nefarious and also a pirate. True story. So a couple years ago, I'm teaching at the Harvard. They added the to the Harvard. You have to say the Harvard now because it's now that much more pretentious when you do that. Anyway, so I'm teaching at the Harvard, and it's Dance Like a Pirate Day because it's Talk Like a Pirate Day. Therefore, we're going to dance like pirates. And I'm walking across the quad, roughly adjacent to Mark Zuckerberg's dormitory, the one where he founded Facebook, supposedly. And I'm scrolling on Facebook, unaware of the enduring and deep irony of this moment until years later. And I come across a news feed, a story from the Crimson saying that one of our undergraduate students, Arun Khanna, has been unceremoniously fired from Facebook, a company founded at Harvard. So this is a kind of a big deal that an undergraduate from Harvard would be fired from this very Harvardian. They like to say Harvardian. That's not true. Don't try that out with your Harvard friends. They will not appreciate it. Anyway, so what Arun Khanna did to get fired was he came up with a browser extension called Marauder's Map. Marauder's Map, this is apparently really funny if you've ever read Harry Potter. Give it up for Harry Potter. Yeah, okay. Oh, that was okay, great. So Marauder's Map, that was very enthusiastic, sir. So a big fan. So Marauder's Map in Harry Potter provides a kind of God's eye view of the various ghosts and crap, I guess, whatever, in the Harry Potter verse, right? The idea being that if you have the Marauder's Map, you can see the true essence and essential character of the space and time around you, yeah? So what Arun Khanna did was he created a browser extension that scraped Facebook Messenger location data to give folks access to the real and past time location of Facebook Messenger users. And there was I think at that point a billion or two of those users, so this was kind of a big deal. Also, at this time, I think some of us, we'd kind of known that Facebook was mining our phones and stuff for location data. We didn't really, I don't think, appreciate it fully at that time. So now we had this irreconcilable proof that not only was Facebook mining our location data, they were securing it poorly. So poorly that an undergraduate student could create a browser extension that would, in essence, reveal the real-time location of a billion people on the planet. Cool, right? Yeah, break stuff and do cool shit. Thank you, Harvard and Mark Zuckerberg. In any event, I'm sorry, the swearing is happening a lot. I'm sorry. The swearing comes out of me when I'm talking about the stuff. Is that okay? So a content warning, adulthood. Anyway, so Marauder's map is very controversial, and it seems to me to be a kind of it kind of rhymes with the ways of viewing dance performance in the 16th or 17th or so centuries. That was surprisingly complicated to say. I did it. Please clap. Yeah. Yes. JK, you don't actually have to clap when I tell you to. It is appreciated. Yeah, and you can also clap whenever you feel like it. That's also fine. But so this is a moment of rhyme, right, between a moment in dance history and a contemporary surveillant nightmare. Marauder's map. Now, I want to talk a little bit about like what choreography is for a moment. I am a choreographer by training. I went to have you ever seen what's the movie with Natalie Portman? Black Swan. Yeah. Black Swan. Cool. Have you seen John Wick 3? Okay, so between those two movies, that's like my bio. That's my biography, basically. It's like a biopic, except they don't die at the end. Spoiler. So my conservatory training is deeply preoccupied with the discipline of the body, right? So I am trained in a bunch of sort of Russian old school ways of moving bodies through space and time and disciplining the self in the service of certain kinds of expressive moments, right? I want to be clear, though, I am an artist, right? I am an artist whose sort of research practice is parametered by what I understand as an artist to be choreography. I'm not a historian. I'm not a theorist. I am certainly not a computer scientist or an engineer. So I'm approaching these questions of movement and bodies, space and time, computation and surveillance from the standpoint of an artistic practitioner. But I also have been looking for ways of kind of taking choreography or choreographics or a kind of choreographic lens and applying it to some of these emerging problem sets that for me seem deeply preoccupied with how bodies moving through space and time generate meaning, whether on a stage for an audience of people or algorithmically for an audience of computers. I'm going to borrow, poorly probably, a bit of vocabulary from Andrei Lepecki, who's a dance theorist. I'm gesturing at my colleague Rebecca Schneider, who is an expert in this and many of the things that I'm mentioning. And as are, I'm sure, many of you, especially when I get into the motion capture stuff. I'm fully confident that many of you are far more expert in these things than I am. Lepecki, this is back a couple years ago, wrote a thing for TDR called Choreography. It's an apparatus of capture. So this is kind of resisting the idea that choreography is like a series of moves that exists like independently of space and time or sort of mechanisms of signification and power, but rather as an apparatus, as a larger, more complex understanding of the body that relates specifically and in interesting ways to spectatorship and to power. So one way of thinking about this would be, for example, how many of you know the choreography to the YMCA? Great. Can somebody please demonstrate for me the choreography to the YMCA? Yes.
Okay, I'm going to sing it.
Okay.
YMCA. Got it.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That was amazing. So that's never happened before. So I want to observe a few things about literally what just happened, right? So in contrast to thinking of the YMCA as like this shape and then this shape and then this shape and then this shape. First you said, okay, you're going to sing it first. There's going to be this musical thing that happens. There's a kind of sonic bandwidth or wavelength that that correlates to the movement, right? And then you invoked the social. You invoked a bunch of other nerds. Sorry, I mean nerds in like I'm taking the word back, right? So it's not pejorative, it's an affirmation ultimately. But you brought a bunch of other people to do these movements for you. And you also, there was no moment of like everybody kind of went like, why? You didn't go like, why? Right? So like the choreography of the YMCA is not just the shape, not just the social sort of affinity that just materialized there, not just your call and command to people to join you, but it's also like not shape, right? So we have the shape of the Y, and then we have all of these other shapes that aren't the original shape that are also somehow composed within the choreography of the YMCA. This is to say, I'm getting there. This is to say that the choreography of the thing is not just the bodies and the shape. There's all sorts of other stuff that can be understood within the realm of the choreography. And for me, this Lepeckian notion of the apparatus of capture helps create an encompassing notion of where choreography is. That is helpful, especially when we start to talk about the state, when we start to talk about surveillance, and when we start to talk about power. I want to introduce you to Baby Cha-Cha. Oh, before I introduce you to Baby Cha-Cha, this is one of my favorite quotes attributed to Joseph Stalin, when there is a person, there is a problem. When there is not a person, there is not a problem. Just kind of keep that in mind. As we meet Baby Cha-Cha, how many of you have ever seen Baby Cha-Cha before? Yeah, cool. Out of curiosity, what is the context that you have seen Baby Cha-Cha in? Ally McBeal, thank you. Exactly. Baby Cha-Cha, arguably the first internet meme, has many various sort of haunted lives, including Family Guy, Ally McBeal, wide presence on the internet, also known as Baby Ooga Chukka, for those of you keeping track. This Baby Cha-Cha was included as a model of bipedal physics in a software program in the 90s called Character Studio that was engineered by a dude named Michael Gerard and his team. Gerard was preoccupied with questions not only of the physics of movement as rendered digitally, but how these things were animated, how they created avatars, how those avatars moved, seemed lifelike, and etc. Michael Gerard worked with two digital artists of some renown, Paul Kaiser and Shelley Eshkar, who one day received a phone call from the Estate Project for Artists with AIDS. Now, this is an unfortunately now defunct organization that at the time was charged with the archiving of artwork created by artists living with HIV or dying of AIDS. And I want to put this in stakes that are have as much gravitas as the work of this organization at this time. This is the mid-90s. There are no stakes more sort of serious than this organization working at this time. And especially for the dance field, right? The dance field at this moment has been broadly decimated by AIDS, and it is a fast-moving epidemic that we still feel in the dance community reverberations of to this day. One of my professors in graduate school likened it to going to a funeral every morning until you run out of friends. The Estate Project was charged with holding on to the artwork of those who were living with HIV and dying of AIDS. And some manners of fashion, for example, with plastic art, objects of art, the archival practices were somewhat more straightforward. There are archival practices that have existed for a long time, that helped with these processes. With dance, much less so. Dance historically is known as an ephemeral art. It's slippery. It is out of one's hands as soon as it comes into existence. Its ephemerality is almost definitionally the dance. So similarly, archival practices around dance are very fraught. And there are no standard best practice. That's the espresso and Dayquil. I'm realizing there are no best practices for the archiving of dance performance, not in the way that there are for other art forms. The Estate Project heard of the work of Michael and Paul and Shelley, specifically as it related not only to digital physics and animation, but to an emergent technology of motion capture. Motion capture, or mocap. At this time, this is before Lord of the Rings. This is before Hollywood sort of seized on mocap as a means of animating sort of virtual characters into real-life situations. The Estate Project for Artists with AIDS hoped that Michael Gerard would be able to use a technology of motion capture and the software behind Baby Cha-Cha to hold on to the archives and the repertories of dance artists dying of AIDS. And so they engineered a test. Michael Gerard and team took some grant money from the Estate Project to see if motion capture could be used in this singular queer dance historical moment to hold on to the slippery repertories of dance artists. And I just want to show you a very quick clip of sort of what this looked like in practice. Gerard and Paul and Shelley engaged titans of choreography, Bill T. Jones and Merce Cunningham in this test. And I just want to show you a little bit of the process here. This is one of Merce's dancers in the rig. Note we have multiple sensor apparatuses. She's wearing the little bubbly things. And this is the data extracted and then reanimated with, for some reason, a kind of skeuomorphic stage set thing happening. Now, Paul and Shelley ultimately were digital artists and animators, and so you can see some of the progression by which the motion capture data turns into these kind of ghostly humanoid forms. Also note that for all of its sort of expressiveness in the kind of sort of hand-brushed tone of these animations, these are bodies that are fairly without qualities, without demarcations of gender, race, ethnicity, cultural heritage, and the like. So these are hauntings that are somewhere between having certain kinds of characteristics of movement and being absent characteristics of embodiment. Now, ultimately, and yes, in the end, these animations sort of look something like this. Now, from a motion capture, an archival perspective, this was a failed experiment. Motion capture proved to be too expensive, too unwieldy a process to hold on to the archives, the repertories of these dance artists. Though this work did result in at least two sort of masterpieces of the Western dance tradition, namely Bill T. Jones's Ghost Catching, which premiered at Cooper Union in the late 90s, and Bill T. Jones's Biped, which premiered in the early 2000s and is named for Biped, the software plugin that Michael Gerard had engineered. So this, for me, is a moment of overlap between histories of motion capture and computer science and the Western dance tradition. But it doesn't end there. I was talking with Gerard by phone a little bit ago, and he said something to the effect of that there is no contemporary motion capture technology without Bill T. Jones. There is no contemporary motion capture technology without Merce Cunningham. The data sets that they were working through, the training data that they created working with Merce and with Bill live on in the software now known as 3ds Max, which has been acquired by Autodesk. So Autodesk now has software that is literally haunted or imbued with motion capture data from these two choreographers and their dancers dating back some 20-odd years. This is, again, dance finds itself in computer science in odd moments. I want to be kind of literal for that, in that note for a moment. I'm going to skip over roughly 20 years of computer science history and introduce you to Everybody Dance Now. This is a bit of nerdery that came out of Berkeley about a year ago. I'm going to leave the CSing to the experts. I'm sure that there are people who are way better at talking this through than I will. I'm just going to give you kind of the broad strokes here. Everybody Dance Now was the name of a paper and a video that we'll see in a moment that demonstrated a technique to extract movement data from a video source, from a source, and apply that movement data to a target. So we have a source to target kind of relationship here. And what the computational system was able to do was to look at it like a YouTube video, an arbitrary YouTube video with an arbitrary subject moving in arbitrary ways. It was able to extract movement data from that video and apply it to a target. Let me show you what I mean by that. I hope you like Bruno Mars. So real quick, messed that up. So this is Bruno Mars, and this was fed to the system, and the choreography of Bruno Mars was extracted. So Bruno Mars is the source, and these are the poor graduate students who have been subjected to this computational array. No, not trained dancers here at all. Okay. Real quick, we have here up top, that's the source video, the series of detected poses by the computational system down here, and the application of that, let's just call it choreography, to these two graduate student targets. Mess that up again. Oop. Let's try that again. Okay. So we start with Bruno. Graduate students having a crisis. And now through this system, they're able to move a la Bruno Mars. Now, Bruno Mars is not the only possible source that is feasible with this technology. In a moment, we're going to see ballerina Misty Copeland and these poor graduate students. Through this system, the choreography is able to be extracted and re-rendered on other people's bodies. Wepa. Yeah, sure, you can applaud that. Now, I just want to again, without getting into the engineering of the thing, which I couldn't possibly understand, what's happening here is an arbitrary source. The movement from an arbitrary source is being mined, extracted, extrapolated from a source and applied to an arbitrary target. This is to say that the choreography and choreographics of any source can be applied in this context to any target. Now, it's not a coincidence that the kind of technology represented here, which also goes by the name of deep fakes, deep fakery, deep faking, is common on such in troll neighborhoods like Reddit, and is used largely currently for sex crimes. This kind of technology where bodies can be made malleable and made to perform as avatars, as puppets. It's cool technology on some level. It's fun to watch, but it has very real stakes associated with it. I want to give you one more example. How many of you have heard of Lil Miquela? Wow, yes. Can somebody tell me who Lil Miquela is?
She's a digital influencer.
She said, perfect. Thank you. Lil Miquela is a digital influencer. She is, I think she's about 19 now. She's like Spanish Moroccan descent, I want to say. She is an Instagram influencer par excellence, right? She gets paid, and her parent company gets paid tens of thousands of dollars to wear like certain kinds of hats and sell certain kinds of merch. She also, a la Paris Hilton, has released a series of music videos. She has a kind of YouTube situation happening. And here, let me introduce you to Lil Miquela. So Lil Miquela is this individual here. And I think it's best if you think of her as kind of the offshoot of Max Headroom and Lonely Girl 15. And I bring that up because Lil Miquela is a robot. She does not exist. She is an entirely fictive creation of her parent company, Brud, which is based in Los Angeles. I have been fascinated with Lil Miquela recently, especially in so much as her character has been increasingly preoccupied with being an artist. So she also, let me show you her most recent music video. This is called Money, if I'm not mistaken. In the cat suit, that's Lil Miquela. That's with the Gemini, that's Lil Miquela. Lil Miquela. So, as a piece, yeah, it's uncanny, right? So a lot of you, let me just show you, if I could take a picture of my face, imitating your faces were looking like, understandably so. That is the face of the uncanny valley. So Lil Miquela, she is increasingly a real embodied presence in fictive virtual environments. The engineers at Brud, and there are a lot of them, have been working on a series of motion capture pipelines designed to take real bodies and insert them into virtual realms. Now, also just as a piece of media, that's just sort of fascinating. There's all kinds of crap going on there, and it's unclear to me just the depth of interest and intelligence. It's like queer Euphoria stuff, and there's drug use and like eye makeup, and it's unclear who designed all that. But I want to meet them anyway. So Lil Miquela is not content to be a virtual presence, or Brud is not content to have Lil Miquela be a virtual presence. I spoke with a number of engineers at Brud about their priorities as engineers, their engineering priorities. And the reason they're increasingly fixated on real-time systems of motion capture and reanimation or presentation. And the reason for that is because they want Lil Miquela to perform. They want to bring Lil Miquela to live shows. They want her to be able to be materially present at the Paris Fashion Week and at her own concerts. Brud is actively trying to make technologies where a fake virtual body can be made to appear real, in real space and time. So what this engineer that I talked to, Thomas, said that it's their ambition, though, to not strip the entireness of Miquela's uncanniness. Indeed, the uncanniness of Lil Miquela is one of her drawing, sort of abject qualities. In Thomas's words, they're trying to make Lil Miquela look more like real plastic and less like digital plastic. Sure. I want to talk a little bit more about sort of how the choreographics of this interface with us in real life, and start to segue into questions of the state. The other side of this notion of an apparatus of capture is a kind of enforcement mechanism, an apparatus perhaps of control, where going back to your telling people to do the YMCA, right? How choreography is inflected with questions of power. And this is particularly of concern to me, or of interest to me, in so much as the state, the apparatus of the state is involved. Of course, the relationship between the state and bodies, this is an old conversation. I would recommend, if you're interested in some of this history, the recent work by scholar Simone Brown is particularly useful here. This is a long and deeply fraught, highly violent, this is like 9/10 of Foucault, right? So there's like a lot of history here that specifically talks about how the state interacts with bodies. And the choreographic lens can be useful here. I want to, how many of you have seen the film Minority Report? What happens in the film Minority Report? Anybody want to give me the 10-word version of what happens in Minority Report? Please.
They trap these magical people that can predict the future, and that allows them to do pre-crime, where they can arrest people before they commit crime.
Thank you. That was. Can we give a round of applause to the person who nobly, yes. You did a masterful job summarizing a garbage fire of a film. The Minority Report is not a good movie. It is a long movie. It is a movie that, by dint of the kind of magical properties you mentioned earlier, it is a movie that seems to get longer with every time you watch it. But for me, I'm principally interested in the kind of the meme life of this film, because there's about 90 seconds or so in this movie that are particularly consequential from a choreographic, a gestural, and surveillant perspective. So this is Tom Cruise, or Tom Cruise's meat suit. It's hard to tell the difference. And this is Tom Cruise going through a series of choreographed, codified, repetitious but non-repeating gestures. He is going through the magical space soup or whatever from the Psychics. This movie is garbage and doesn't make any sense. But note how Tom Cruise, as master of the interface, is able to work through conflicting media of space and of time.
Can you grab that? It's unclear.
He's also acting, I guess? Oh, this is my favorite part. Watch carefully. So this is a speculative future where the computers are apparently unnetworked, and some guy's job is to take like the USB thing from one computer to the... I want to tell you the story of the interface here. I'm going to start talking really quickly because I realize we're out of time, and I think there's a class in here at 1. Those gestures were choreographed by a computer scientist and interface expert named John Underkoffler in the late 90s at MIT's Media Lab. He created something called G-Speak, I think the G is for gesture. I can't quite be sure of that. G-Speak, where he created not just a series of gestures that could be read by a computational system, but he indeed designed the computational system around which the gestures could be read, right? So he's hired by Steven Spielberg in the late 90s to create the kind of interface, the speculative interface modalities of the film Minority Report, which we just saw here. And this gestural vocabulary, it's sexy, right? It's a modality that makes present the body. It's interesting to watch. It's very in the sort of the Steve Jobsian sense. It's lickable. But that's actually a quote. That was when Steve Jobs when he knew a product was ready, he would say it was like lickable. Anyway, gross. Yeah, kind of gross dude. Complicated man. Anyway, the success of this interface modality in Minority Report, it turns into all sorts of memes. It's rendered through the internetosphere circa 2002. And it also gets John Underkoffler a lot of work. So John Underkoffler, having Spielbergized his actual real world choreographic interface, he gets hired again by Hollywood to create the holographic displays in a film franchise called Iron Man. How many of you have heard of Iron Man? Yeah, so it's kind of a thing, right? But in the context of the Marvel Universe, it's difficult to separate out the character of Iron Man from the interface modalities that Tony Stark uses to, I don't know, fight aliens or whatever. So John Underkoffler is all of a sudden in a great deal of demand for how he's able to sort of speculate human-computer interfaces, specifically of a choreographic and gestural sort. He gets hired by a little company down the street called Raytheon Missile Design Systems, I think, to see if his gestural, it's a small company, makes bombs. To see if the holographic interface modalities that he sort of speculated on through Minority Report and Iron Man can be used to make actual missiles. So this is a fun quote. This is after Underkoffler left Raytheon, but was apparently quite successful in his work there. A lot of our engineers joke that Tony Stark, Iron Man, wished he had this lab. This is the immersive holographic lab at Raytheon that is used to design missiles. We joke often that this is the lab where Hollywood and PlayStation meet missiles. That's Kendall Loomis who runs the place. If that's a joke, it's not like funny ha-ha. Exactly, but it goes to show how the choreographic imagination of Underkoffler lives on literally and with explosive results. But that's not even the end of the story. This choreography has even more ramifications in the real world. John Underkoffler eventually took the intellectual property of this choreography, which is a complicated thing all of its own, and started a company in LA called Oblong Industries. This is, I think, a bit of a nod to Stark Industries. Oblong Industries, as you might expect, is a collaboration company with defensive applications. They create collaborative computational systems, big screens, and et cetera, that use a gestural control and sort of wand interface to allow people to across the world work with big data sets. So the kind of dystopic nightmare that is the film Minority Report, that is nerds from Raytheon making jokes, lives on in Oblong Industries' client list, where John Underkoffler now currently works with such folks as the Department of Defense and Saudi Aramco, the state-owned energy company run by the Saudi state. The choreography of Minority Report has echoes. It has ripples. And we're not even done yet. I'm going to talk fast. Holy crap. I want to show you one more funny haha video. Uptown Spot. Another defense company just down the street. How many of you have heard of Boston Dynamics? Yeah, cool. They're a robot company that's run by a Japanese bank, because we live in William Gibson's universe. And they've been releasing a lot of viral meme videos lately, showing off the acrobatic and dancerly capacities of their robots. And I'm going to show you one of those now. Also ominously set to Bruno Mars, who is apparently the voice of the future.
We're gonna show out, smoother than a fresh drop skipping. I'm too hot, hot damn. Call the police and the fireman. I'm too hot, hot damn. Make a dragon wanna retire, man. I'm too hot, hot damn. You say my name, you know who I am. I'm too hot, hot damn.
The running dog.
I'm a man, bow down, money, break it down. Girls hit you, hallelujah. Girls hit you, hallelujah. Girls hit you, hallelujah. 'Cause I'm tenfold gon' give it to you. 'Cause I'm tenfold gon' give it to you.
This is around when you realize that these robots are designed also to carry things like machine guns.
Don't believe me, just watch. Come on.
Okay, point of clarification, that is the robot's butt. That is the robot looking at you, looking at its butt.
Just watch.
In the interest of time, I'm going to stop right there. It goes on. When that video came out about a year ago, I fell out of my chair, and then I got up again, and then I fell out of my chair again, because I'd never seen such a frankly horrifying choreographic display on such a robot that is, Boston Dynamics is a military industrial company, right? This is a military company making viral dance videos. And I didn't have, and I don't have, a vocabulary really to process those feelings. Like, there's not a therapist that I know of that can help me work through those feelings. If you have one, that would be super great. And I would, let's talk. In any event, I emailed, because I had so many questions, I emailed like info@bostondynamics.murderpizza.com or whatever their URL is, to ask like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, how does this make sense to you? Like, I understand, like, building, defensive robots, yeah, clear rubble, yeah, hold heavy stuff, yeah, machine guns. I don't understand this. Can you tell me what the F-bomb is happening here? And this is the true story. Within 5 minutes, I got an email back from Mark, the founder of this company, the CEO of also MIT, oddly enough, who wrote me back and says, yeah, isn't this great? We're going to do a lot more of these. Also, do you know any Boston-based choreographers? Because we'd really like to collaborate with choreographers to make more of these videos. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, I'm making him sound kind of like Mean Girls. That's not actually how he sounds like. That's not how he sounds. But he also asked if I knew of anybody who would be interested in producing dance shows featuring these robots. I'm not even done yet, bro. I'm not even done. I confirmed with some presenter colleagues up and down the Eastern Seaboard that they had received letters of inquiry from Boston Dynamics, the military defense robotics company, asking if they would be interested in collaborating on shows involving these robots. And indeed, just like 3 days ago, we got news that Cirque du Soleil and Boston Dynamics now have an agreement to put on shows involving these robots. This, for me, is another example of the porousness between military defense, emerging technologies, and dance, and art, performance junk. This drives me insane. I don't have the vocabulary here to understand what's happening here. But this is an emergent phenomena that I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of. I'm going to skip a couple things in the interest of time. I want to tell you a little bit about how I'm kind of working through some of this crap, because again, per the beginning, I'm not expert in all of this. Like, I'm a dance maker by training. I'm trained, and my job up until a couple years ago was like to tell bodies on stages to dance in particular ways to music for an audience who had rented seats in theaters. Like, this is not my bailiwick. And yet I'm increasingly fixated on the questions that this kind of garbage sauce provokes. What this has made clear to me also is that the deeply the collaborative nature, the necessity of collaboration when working to understand how all of this stuff works. This means that my job, as I understand it, is not just to be sort of expert in choreography or whatever, but to reach out to nerds in a good way, to folks in computer science, to anthropologists, to ethnographers, to folks working in surveillance studies, critical race studies, people who are not typically in the same room together, to try and begin to articulate the questions that are posed by this kind of media, the questions that are posed by the choreographic operations and machinations of the state and defensive technologies and art and performance. I don't have the words, I don't have the expertise, but my hope is that we will. To wit, for the last 5 years, I've been producing an event here at Brown, the Conference for Research on Choreographic Interfaces, or CIRCE for short. This is a bit of a nod, by the way, to the necromancer, witch / feminist icon in the Odyssey, if ever you needed kind of a role model for being unable to distinguish between technology and magic. In any event, the CIRCE has been a kind of clearinghouse of ideas and of the posing of questions across taxonomies of expertise. This will be our 5th year at Brown. town, March 6th and 7th. If you are in town, I would highly recommend that you come and that you show up and that you ask questions and that you drink beer and eat pizza and be with the nerds. This is a space that we have tried, we try year over year to allow for conversations, for facilitated discussion across expertise, and in particular with artists, with computer scientists, with performers and engineers, and not in like kind of a STEM to STEAM kind of dancing volcanoes, singing parabolas kind of way. I guess I want to close real quick so we have a little bit of time for questions. There will be a room. This is a room composed, if I'm not mistaken, specifically of people who are in some way Brown affiliated. You are receiving training in all these matters of computer science, cybersecurity, future-facing stuff. You are definitionally privileged to be in this room. And I bet you that each of you will have a moment in your future where you are in the room where these kinds of technologies are engineered. You will be in the room and present when your team decides to investigate some kind of use case, some kind of bit of functionality, decides to engineer some new, novel, emerging technology that doesn't yet exist. You're going to be in that room. Now, this stuff moves really fast. It moves faster than it ever has before, and this is a tactic. This is a tactic of corporations, surveillant capitalist corporations, to move fast and break things. The Silicon Valley ethos is one of escaping legislative gravity and accountability. If you don't speak up in that room, when you are in the room, when these things are designed, when they're being engineered, when they're being thought through, if you do not speak up and slow things down and add a potentially humanist perspective, if you don't say no in that moment, because of the speed of these things, chances are nobody else can or will. I want to show you a picture. This is a portrait of me and my 8-year-old son. This was taken by Google Maps a couple months ago and is accessible to anybody with an internet connection. That's my Subaru, and that's my house. And that's my kid, that's my purse, that's my shrub. That's also my hose. This picture was taken without my consent. This picture was taken in a rolling trolley of surveillance that did not permit anybody to opt into its gaze. This picture exists, so far as I can tell, forever on the internet. This is my body. That's my kid. That's my house. And there was a room at some point where some gaggle of nerds thought that this crap was a good idea. I'm not okay with this. I did not consent to this. This is a level of intimacy and peering into my life that I did not say yes to. There are real stakes to how our bodies exist relative to these surveillance technologies. I want to close, I'm skipping over some examples in the interest of time. I want to close by sharing with you one of my favorite passages from one of my favorite artists, David Jarnowitz. This is from Close to the Knives. He was an artist and a writer who died at the age of 37, which is how old I am right now. He said, "With enough gestures, we can deafen the satellites and lift the curtains surrounding the control room. May it be so." Thank you. Let's take questions outside. Thank you.
Very entertaining and informative. Thank you. No, so I deeply preoccupied with the section of computer science.
also wait until we're outside. It's just, I was just wondering, I guess on a more, like, less literal level, I've been thinking a lot about the actual, like, process of programming itself and how it